Greetings to you in the name of Yawasha, the Hashwar Hebrew name for Jesus. I'm Michael Hoshai, and I'm with you today to continue in the series Revelation in Light of Daniel with part 11a, the whore and beast of Revelation 17. We've covered a lot of ground, as mentioned before. We've come from Daniel chapter 2 all the way up to chapter 13. Now we're transitioning into chapter 17 as we're nearing the end of the series. But it is this section where there will be multiple videos, at least 3, concerning this woman and this beast. You may remember, if you haven't seen the previous videos, I've mentioned all the way through that it is very important that you take notes throughout the series, and I've given examples of how to write those notes down. The math and the correlations can become confusing at this point. It is very important. Just to break it down real quick, we learned that Daniel's beasts of chapter 7 had 7 heads. We tracked those all the way up to Revelation 12 and Revelation 13, and now we're about to see a number of 7 heads again in 17. We've also learned that Daniel chapter 7 had 10 horns plus 1 that came up later and plucked up 3, which left 8. And then that came from the principle of believe and do as I say or die, which Antiochus IV Epiphanes started, which he was represented as the little horn that came out of one of the 4 on the goat's head in Daniel chapter 8. And we've traced the pompous words, which are those things, up to chapter 12 and chapter 13. And now it is that these 10 horns are the same as the 10 horns of Daniel chapter 7 are the same as the 10 horns in Daniel Revelation chapter 13. But the 10 horns and Revelation chapter 12 are not the same as the horns of Daniel 7 nor Revelation 13. As a matter of fact, we're going to see today that those 10 horns in Revelation chapter 12 are the same horns here in Revelation chapter 17. So let's begin. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'll try to keep it short and sweet, but it's going to be multiple videos, I can assure you of that. We begin in Revelation 17, verse 1. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Now, please understand, I wasn't being mean by calling this woman a whore. The scripture itself calls her a whore. Later, easy read versions and more polite versions, politically correct versions of the Bible may say harlot or strumpet or something of that nature. So the first thing we have to ask is, the whore that sitteth upon many waters. Well, what are the waters? Well, if we drop way down here and take a look, in verse 15 it says, where the angel is explaining to John what the image was, it says, And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Keep that in mind. I will bring it up a moment or two later. So at any rate, let's continue. We see that this whore is sitting on many peoples, nations, tongues, all of that. Let's continue on. With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. There's a lot being said right here behind the scenes, where this woman, this whore, has had agreements with the kings of the earth, and the people who followed them were made drunk with the wine. That is the results of the agreements made. which is called fornication. So let's continue on. So he carried me away into the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. There's your 7 heads. These are not the 7 heads of Daniel. These are 7 heads that represent the attributes of those same kingdoms. But we know a little bit further down under the explanation, the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Now remember, I just said that that the 10 horns of Revelation chapter 12, which had no crowns on them, are these very horns. And this is how we know. Because those horns didn't have any crowns on them, let's see the interpretation that the angel gave to John. And here's the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Now this apparently is, if you do a search of the Vatican and the 7 hills, you'll find that the Vatican itself sits on 7 hills. That can be considered coincidence. I personally don't subscribe to that, but nonetheless, let's continue on. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. Now you will remember that when I spoke of the horns from Daniel, that there were 7 left, and then 1 came up from the one that came up among them and plucked up the first 3. It says there were 10 horns, and then another little horn came up among them and plucked out the first 3. That left 7 of the original horns plus the 1, which made 8 horns. And here it is that we explained all the way up to the next to the last king or horn, continuation of Rome, and that it was unknown who it was at this time. However, we see right here in 17:10, and there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is. If you look at that from John's point of view, all of the kings, all of the kingdoms up to this point were fulfilled, and Rome was in rule. So this started the continuations. And so here it is that we've seen out of the continuations of Rome, from the Western Empire after it was split up, that in our time, 5 are fallen and 1 is. We are still up under Mussolini, Hitler, legitimization of being continuations of the Roman Empire. And although they are dead and gone, it does not mean that we have left out from under their continuation, because no one has come forward yet and claimed it from the point of their death. So we are still up under that next to the last horn, which would be the number 9. So at any rate, here it is, and 1 is. So if we apply this to us, 5 of those 7 horns have fallen, 1 still is, and the other is not yet come. So it has not been identified yet. So let's continue on. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And here it comes. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. Now this is talking about the beast as a whole. We've learned in chapter 12 that the red dragon, the body is Satan, who is leading the heads, the 7 heads which had the crowns, and also the 10 horns which did not have crowns. So here it is that this beast is like the red dragon. He's calling it Satan. How do we know that it is Satan? Well, where have we seen the beast that was and is not, and even he is the 8th and of the 7? Well, let's see. We saw in chapter 13 where Here, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So, if we understand that the head was once living and then it suffered a wound to death, and then all of a sudden it was brought back to life, the beast that was is not, the beast that is not, and yet is. Here it is, all three of them in place. And we know that Satan is pulling the strings on these ropes. So, on this, of these heads. So let's continue on and understand how is it that he goes into perdition. I'm sorry, let me get down here. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Where have we seen that? Maybe in Revelation 20? Oh, yes, right here. 20 and 1. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, until the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. Do you see that? So let's go back to Revelation 17. And the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. So if we look at the definition of perdition, what does that mean? Here it is. G64. 684, I'm sorry. Apolia. There it is. Derivative of 622. Ruin or loss. Physical, spiritual, or eternal. What do we know is ruin and eternal? That is the lake of fire. It is forever and ever. So, once we learn that, we learn that this beast is Satan. But it's a scarlet-colored beast and full of names of blasphemy. Names of blasphemy. What could that mean? The beast is full of names of blasphemy. Well, what does blasphemy mean? Let's take a look. Verse 3, blasphemy. Blasphemia from G989, vilification, especially against God. So these heads are full of names of blasphemy. What is it that Satan does? He deceives. Anything that God does not like is what Satan teaches, leads, believes, and deceives with, such as homosexuality, such as lying, stealing, killing. All of these things are names of blasphemy. So, how would that apply to the church? Well, you know what? We're not even at that point yet. So, let's continue on. We discussed that the 10 horns from chapter 12 are these 10 horns. This is your evidence. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which had received no kingdom as yet, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So the horns on the red dragon, and look, let's take a look at her real quick. There you go. This is the beast right there. But that's not the one that we're looking for. We want this one right here. You see these horns right here? They have no crowns on them. This is the red dragon from chapter 12. These horns have no crowns. They have not been fulfilled. They have not received their kingdom. They have not received power. And that's exactly what we just read. The 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. The horns of chapter 12 in Revelation and the horns of chapter 17 on this beast in Revelation are the same horns and are not the same horns as those of Daniel. Now, to get our math and our correlations correct, we need to understand that the seven remaining horns of Daniel chapter 7, after the first three were plucked up, 10 minus 3 equals 7. The 7 horns now translate to this beast's heads. Because remember, when we talked about that little horn with the eyes and mouth of a man speaking pompous words all the way up to judgment, I asked you to write down in your notes that he is the 8th and among the 7. I asked you to do that. And here it is that we have just read. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and one is, and the other is not yet come. So we take the horns to the heads. 5 have fallen. One is, the other is not yet come. But what does it say after this? And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and of the 7. Now you remember, Satan pulls the strings of man. Man turns around and tells people, believe and do what I say or die. And this is what we've tracked all the way up to this point. So here it is that the 7 remaining horns have translated into the heads of this beast. And it said that the 8th is among the 7. Remember, there were 7 horns. Why were there only 7 horns left? Because a little horn came up and plucked up 3. 10 minus 3 equals 7, plus the 1 equals 8. Is himself the 8th and of the 7. Do you understand? It's plain as day, my brothers and sisters. It is so easy to understand. Now, let's continue on. There's a lot to cover. We're already almost 20 minutes in. There's going to be several parts of this to part 11. So, at any rate, let's continue on. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Man, let's go take a look at this woman. Let's just get an idea of something, what's going on here, if we can. Here she is, in all her glory. There's your beast, and there's this woman. If we look, we have the purple, and we have the red, we have the gold on her neck and everything, and here she is presenting herself all wonderful and so forth, just like the scripture says. But there's something you need to know about the colors. Why were these colors chosen? And that's simple enough to understand. Let's go back to our screenshots. I want to have you look at something here. I know this is a little bit small, but I'm going to read it to you. It is from the Holman Illustrated Dictionary of the Bible and Bible Dictionary. A second reason for color designations in the Bible involves a more specialized usage. At times, a writer may use color in a symbolic sense to convey theological truth about the subject of his writing. Color designations have general symbolic significance. For instance, white may be symbolic of purity or joy. Black may symbolize judgment or decay. Red, remember, there it is, red. Let me show you where I'm reading right here so you can keep up with me here. Red may symbolize sin or lifeblood. And look, purple may be symbolic of luxury and elegance. Let me ask you a question. I should have grabbed a photo of this, but I didn't think about it at the time. I'll be sure to get this photo and a couple others to put in the comments below the subsections. So here it is. The woman is arrayed in red and purple. If we were to go look at a procession with the Pope from the Catholic Church presiding over it, watching on, he wears red, purple. His triple crown tiara, whatever you want to call it there, has 3 crowns on it. It's embedded with jewels and all this. If you do a search on the many triple crowns of the popes, you'll find that many, pretty much all of these popes glorified this crown with many jewels and gold and pearls and all these wonderful, beautiful things, arraying themselves in robes of red and purple, and even the cardinals and so forth, they have to wear red robes and all of these things. And this procession is just absolutely beautiful and stunning to look at, but it is exactly what this woman is arrayed in. So you have to ask yourself, is there a link? And there is. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at that real quick. Just to show you the kind of grandeur this religion, this belief system believes in. If you look right here, look at all this stuff. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is supposedly built on top of the tomb of Yahusha. And it is a Catholic church. But if you see all kinds of things, which this picture is going to come in a little bit later, if you see all these things right here, you look, there's gold, there's all kinds of different colors, there's jewels, everything, all these candles, everything's going on in this place that doesn't relate to Yahusha, the Christ, the Messiah. It doesn't relate to him. He strictly forbade these things. But nonetheless, let's go back and look at this woman again. And here she is. The purple represented royalty, and the red represented sin or life blood. So let's take into consideration, what does the Pope consider himself? He considers himself the Vicar of Christ. Christ is often seen robed in purple or red in their images that they release. And this is a symbol of the blood and a symbol of his royalty. So here it is that this woman is doing the same thing, which is represented as a church, which we're going to make the comparison here shortly. However, the Pope himself does this very thing. Everything in this church, it displays beauty and royalty. And even the Pope calls himself the Vicar of Christ, whom, if you look at the pictures of Christ known today, which is not him, he's in a red robe. And here it is that the Pope does the same thing. This woman is also arrayed in red, representing the blood. So how is it that I can call this woman the church? Well, that's really simple. If we continue on in verse 5, it says, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. If we consider the next verse along with that, and I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. Well, this woman is obviously against God, because it says she killed the saints. The saints are those who follow Christ to the Father and believe in the Father, that the Father resurrected Christ, Yahusha, his son. So how can we tie this to an unrighteous church? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Let's look at the Inquisition. The Inquisition was a biblical judicial procedure and a group of institutions within the Catholic Church whose aim was to combat heresy, apostasy, blasphemy, witchcraft, and customs considered deviant. Violence, torture, or the simplest threat of its application were used by the Inquisition to extract confessions and denunciation from heretics. Studies of the records have found that the overwhelming majority of sentences consisted of penances, but convictions of unrepented heresy were handed over to the secular courts, which generally resulted in execution or life imprisonment. This is very important. You remember that we just read in the first few verses of chapter 17 where this whore had fornications with the kings of the earth. And here it is that this church was in agreement with the rulers or kings of the land at that time in order to have courts of their own without anybody, especially the king or his armies, getting involved. As a matter of fact, this Inquisition burned at least 32,000 people at the stake. All because, why? Because they went after people who did not believe what they said and did not do what they said and apostatized. As a matter of fact, it was in the 16th century, I believe it was, when Martin Luther broke away from the Catholic Church, and from him, the Protestant movement had begun. In other words, people broke away from the Catholic Church in protest, which was started by Martin Luther. And this is how we get all these daughter churches of the Methodist, the Baptist, the Pentecostal, the Lutheran, all of these different denominations. They are breakaways. They are called Protestant churches because they followed after Martin Luther in protest against the Catholic Church. So here it is that if you did not believe in the same doctrine that the Catholic Church taught, then you were considered a heretic. And the inquisitor who abused his authority came for you. And just a little side note, these inquisitors would go up and take the person accused of heresy or even being apostate. That means someone who leaves the church, blaspheming, talking bad about the church or the Pope, and witchcraft and all of these things. He would go and take that person, ultimately torture them out for confession on a rack, which stretched the limbs of the body to where they were about to rip off, which is where the idea of drawing and quartering came from. So with that being the case, they would torture a confession out of them. Once they confessed to being a heretic, they would, most of the time, they would tell them, fine, we absolve you of your heresy, but you still got to die. And then they would take all the property and the land from that family, and the descendants of that individual, the family of that individual, could not get the property back, could not get their possessions back. The best they could do to save face was point the finger at someone else and say that they were a heretic. And that was only to keep their name from being filled with shame, which was apparently a big thing back in that time. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and look at another thing here. We got an example of the Inquisition. I'm getting close on my time. Please forgive me. You may have heard of this woman here. Her name was Joan of Arc. Let's read about Joan of Arc. The trial of Joan of Arc was a 15th century legal proceeding against Joan of Arc, a French military leader under Charles VII during the 100 Years' War. During the siege of Compiègne, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, in 1430, she was captured by Burgundian forces and subsequently sold to their English allies. She was prosecuted by a pro-English church court at Rouen, Normandy in 1431. The court found her guilty of heresy. In other words, they found her guilty of not believing the same thing, and she was burned at the stake. They condemned her as a heretic and a witch and a blasphemer and burned her at the stake. Now, this was after the time in the ecumenical councils of things done behind doors, where someone who was killed that way was shamed, and they could not be, exonerated, or they could not be redeemed from that shame. But later on, since these popes were infallible and they condemned her, later on, another infallible pope turned around and ordained it for her to be made a saint. As a matter of fact, the church that burned down, the Church of Notre Dame, they had to rescue the statue of Joan of Arc out of it, of which they put candles before it and so forth. So the infallible pope condemned her to death by burning at the stake, and then a later pope came in and said she should be a saint. This shows you, this is just a couple examples of the hypocrisy that was done under these trials. Also, just so you know, I didn't make up that number, about 32,000. According to Laurent, nearly 32,000 heretics, quote unquote, were burned at the stake during the Spanish Inquisition, and another 300,000 were put on trial and forced to do penance. So here it is that the truth is revealed. The Spanish Inquisition, along with the Catholic Inquisition, the English Inquisition, all this stuff right here, it was all in league together. They did it all at the same time, all to combat heresy and apostates and blasphemers, all of this. They did this, okay? This is how the church is now linked with the Scripture. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints. Now, I'm sure out of all those people that were killed, I'm sure some were Judeo-Christians and believed wholeheartedly in what the Scripture says, and that's why they were killed. And it was all at the hand of this woman. And as in our history, we can see it was all done at the hand of this church. We haven't even got into the Crusades, which I may not. Nonetheless, the history, the violence, and the brutality of this church from its very beginning shows you who is who when it comes to these scriptures. And we know that this church is directly linked to the prophecy of Daniel. When that little horn came up among the 10, it was the bishops of Rome who plucked up the first 3 horns, the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths. Therefore, this church is directly tied to this prophecy. There is no way around it. They can sit here and tell you, oh no, that's a false interpretation. No. You cannot get around it. A dear friend of mine, we were discussing how the people of Catholicism are blinded. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against the people who go to the Catholic Church and Mass and all this stuff. I am not against you. I am against the doctrine and those who teach this doctrine to you, knowing that it is contrary to Scripture. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and give you a sample of this real quick before we end the video. Let's go to 1 Timothy 4. Now, you remember, it was in 2020 that Pope Francis went down to South America, and a request was made of him by the clergy there of Catholicism that, hey, even though we're married, will you permit us to perform Mass? All of these people want to attend Mass, but I'm married, and you say I can't do it. So, and here it is that back in one of the ecumenical councils, it was determined that no clergy shall be married. So the Pope left South America, went back to Rome, and he stood up in his little window up there and said, no clergy shall be married. None. Even when the people are starving for mass, they want to go to it, they want to perform it, they want to do it, but he won't let them because their leaders are married. So this is in direct contradiction to Scripture. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. Now the Spirit speaks expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies in hypocrisy, like the example of Joan of Arc we just had, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry. That's it. You can't see the length. The Pope is saying that his clergy shall not be married. And yet here it is that the Scripture says that these people will come up against the faith and tell you that you can't be married. You don't see the length. If you don't see that link, you're blind. And we'll hope, we'll have hope for you, and we'll pray for you nonetheless. I have nothing against those who believe in the Catholic doctrine. It's the doctrine itself and those who willfully teach that doctrine knowing it is against Scripture. I hope I haven't confused you too much today. There's a lot to take in. At the end of the series, I will post some notes. I will show how your notes should look. We've traced the 7 beasts and 10 horns from Daniel chapter 7 all the way up to chapter 13. And we've traced the little horn that was started Antiochus IV Epiphanes with his principle of believe and do as I say or die, all the way up to Revelation 17 with the acts and deeds of the Catholic Church in recent history. And we've also tracked the blasphemous words. We've also learned about why this woman is arrayed in the colors that she is, with the jewels that she has, and then we've correlated them to the Catholic Church, which I will be getting a picture to show you this evidence. Personally, I think it's disgusting, but nonetheless, I hope you've learned something today. Stick with me. We still have a couple more parts to go, and which will get all of this explained more clearly by the time we hit the end. I hope you enjoyed this. I thank you for being with me today, and until the next video, have a good day.